Hey, so like Mr. Rogers, I want you to be my neighbor. Hi everyone. This is my first time doing this in a live stream setting, so I thought I would keep it short, keep it on point, so that I don't have to spend my days just constantly editing video. So today we had class about the Nordic welfare model. And there was a great photo that I could have taken of all the ideas and words which we were putting on the board to describe what the Nordic welfare model is. Is it capitalism? Is it socialism? Is it flexicurity? Is it a combination of both? And it was fascinating because you don't really learn that much at home about the history of Scandinavia. When we focus on European history back at home, I would say we probably focus more on the great continental powers, France, Germany, and then of course Britain and our involvement in the wars. And it was fascinating because you learn that really the reason why Nordic society, at least in terms of Denmark and Norway, are concerned, have been so successful is because there is a social compact between the citizens and the government and industry. People have bargained collectively to have certain rights in the workplace, a certain level of standard of living, a certain wage amount. Sorry, my mouth's a little dry, as is often the case here. And a standard of living which is sustainable and the envy of the world. That means healthcare free at the point of use. It means education free at the point of use. And it means a gradual progressive taxation base so that the people at the very top of the economic pyramid, at least in theory, are paying a portion of an income that I would consider fair. So, there's a lot of misconception, like I said before, about what the Nordic model could be defined as. Now, Bernie Sanders used the term democratic socialist. I am not a democratic socialist. I am a social democrat. And the history of the struggle for social democracy is intertwined in the history of Northern Europe. People like Bismarck, people like, even actually in the States, Roosevelt and the New Deal, and of course people like Olof Palme in Sweden fought for a society where the working middle class would be put in a position where they had upward mobility, they had future prospects which were bright, had access to things that made them better workers, cheaper public transportation, low-cost medical care, and education, because these are the essential ingredients to making an economy thrive. And today we were comparing and contrasting stories about the Nordic system with, say, the United States or Japan, and how, for example, in the United States we have a culture of, I would argue, neoliberalism. Liberalism in the sense of classical liberalism, small government, low taxation, freedom of the press, religion, speech, and how that has had a detrimental effect in many ways on, at least in its manifestations here in places like Sweden, on the education system. So what does that mean? That means that there is more of a desire to lower tax rates and things, and if not done correctly, that could decimate a welfare state. But also done in a lesser degree, it could actually be very beneficial. So, you learn that the Nordic model is basically a compromise between state intervention and the private sector. I don't think that's too unreasonable. I am not a right-wing libertarian. I think the state definitely has a role to play in our lives in ensuring equality and ensuring that the social contract is met for those who are the least capable of being productive, the most vulnerable in our society. And I think if there's one thing that we learn about how the Nordic countries are perceived in places like America, you can tell really right off the bat that there's a lot of propaganda directed at us to sort of minimize the power of this model on our own society. You know, newspapers like The Economist or right-wing think tanks, they tell us certain things about the model and exclude others, and they get glib about certain terms and not precise in a way that generalizes an entire way of seeing the world, and I would argue mostly to benefit their readerships, which are probably right-wing and centrist thinking people. And I think that's detrimental to our progress in our country. I want to live in an America that has free access to healthcare, free access to education, because these are investments in our future. I want a green economy so that we can be at the cutting edge of technology and reforms that make the planet's ecological problems fewer, not greater. Lesser, not greater. And, it was just fascinating, particularly when you consider that the reforms that have taken place in Scandinavia to rein in the state have never done so to such an extreme as had occurred under Ronald Reagan or Margaret Thatcher in Britain. And now it seems like we've found a workable model, a compromise between the state and the private sector. Now, the point then becomes, how do we bring this to America? And there are many ways. And I believe Medicare for all that Bernie Sanders is proposing is a great start. In New Jersey, Phil Murphy has proposed making education and community colleges tuition free. I think this is another great idea. And working more with people like Bill de Blasio in New York to ensure that, housing costs are lessened with more public housing. And by ensuring that everyone in our tri-state area has the capability to live a lifestyle that doesn't require you to be a millionaire. And I think living in the Nordic countries, I've noticed that rents are much lower, wages are higher, and the standard of living is generally better. I mean, I don't worry about getting shot walking down the street here. And it's an incredible feat. So I took away from today's class, we need to have more trust in each other as a society. We need to have more resources available to us as a society. And we need to rebuild the middle class the way that it was built up in the 1940s and 50s and 60s and 70s by people who were determined to do so. The Roosevelts, the Eisenhowers, the Trumans, the Kennedys, the Johnsons, who were trying to make a society that worked for everyone. So with that said, I just want to say thank you for watching my very first live stream, and I hope you have a lovely weekend. And I have to write a paper, so I won't be updating much, but take care, and all the best to you. See ya. Bye.